Hello everybody in the chess world. Today we're gonna have a shorter video, but I think it's gonna be a really instructive one. So this is a game that I played in a tournament not so long ago, maybe 3 years ago. And well, I have the white pieces in this position. You can take a few moments to get accustomed to the position. You see that I have this bishop here that is hit by the pawn. I think that the last sequence was h6 check and king on f8. So in this initial position, I think that already you should pause the video and think before doing so. Okay, let us check the general situation. Yes, my opponent is a pawn up and they are hitting my bishop, but you can see that there are a lot of potential tactics in here, so I will recommend to search a little bit for those. Pause the video and think. Well, initially, if we were to look at this position with an engine, I think that if you play the most natural move, let us say bishop on g3, what I mean is just simply retreating the bishop from the attack of the pawn, it's probably at least a plausible move. Now, one option that the engine was suggesting was this weird move, rook takes on d6. Which initially makes a lot of sense tactically. Of course, if black were to take the rook, well, of course we have this check followed by taking the rook, and we're winning. And if g takes f4, we have rook takes d7. Still, there is king on e8 here. I mean, you can see that this rook is left a little bit in dire straits, right? I mean, yes, there is bishop on g4 protecting it, but we could suggest, for example, bishop on e5, just cutting away, I don't know if I wanted to retreat to c7 with my rook because it's still a square in which I will be pretty trapped. But okay, it's in a practical way, it's a pretty complex positions. Maybe I could play some g6 to try and release the rook. This is probably a good line. So if any of you thought about rook takes e6, well done. I mean, it's risky and it's hard to judge, but it's probably actually a correct move. Now, I didn't play rook takes on d6. I did not retreat with the bishop. What I played was e5. I had been looking at this move from afar, like 3-4 moves ago. I think e5 is a decent move. Again, probably not as rook takes d6 was probably better, but e5 is interesting. So my opponent played, I guess, probably the best move. He just bishop takes on e5. I mean, it's not hard to get that. Well, of course, if g takes f4 and e takes f6, well, you can see I have some pressure here. And, well, of course, e takes f6 will simply receive rook takes e6. And going back, if d takes e5, I can even just retreat my bishop. Now, black has this awful bishop on f6. I have the possibility of, I'm threatening d6 on the next move. I think white will be fine. So my opponent took, I took, and he took. So now comes the interesting part of the game and all the tactics involved. So again, if you open an engine, there must be a lot of options here for white. So initially I played something that I had calculated before, and that is kind of logical. I started with rook on f1 check, and after king on g8, I played bishop on h5. So why was I spotting this line from a few moves ago? Well, because I have what to me was a clear threat in here. I mean, I'm threatening actually rook on f7 winning. I mean, I thought it was winning. I'm not sure now, but rook on f7 with idea of rook on g7 and invading, it looks like a winning sequence. So yeah, already from this stage I was kind of cutting the board. I was kind of mainly focusing on this zone right here, not to tell, well, let us say cut the board into like this. Yeah, in a way, of course, just putting all my attention in all, let's say both of my rooks, the bishop and the h6 pawn, kind of putting this fence, around black's king, which looks pretty vulnerable, while all the pieces for black are at least kind of far away from the defense of this king. So I had seen that to prevent rook on f7, followed by rook on g7, my opponent will play rook on f8. And this is what happened in the game. And now is the real important moment for you to pause the video and think. I want to to think about this position, dedicate at least a few minutes and tell me what will you play with white in here. So pause the video and think. Okay, so before showing you the solution, I want to show you what happened in the game, because this is really instructive. In the game, I played rook bb1. Again, a move that I had calculated before. So I have a clear threat now, which is I want to play rook takes on f8 check, king takes on f8, and rook on f1 check. Because then after king on g8, I have bishop on f7 check, and king on h8 loses to bishop on e8. I'll actually show you that. Let us play a, I don't know, e4, just to show you the threat. I will take, king takes, rook on f1 check, king g8 only move, bishop checks, and now if king on h8, I simply have this winning because I'm hitting both the bishop and the mate on f8. I had seen during the game that in this position, the only move will be king on f8. But I saw that then I could repeat. I mean, so in here I will give the check just to test my opponent, of course. I could go back with the check, and after king on g8, yes, of course, I have the option of making a draw. But I was actually looking at rook on f7. Even with a one rook less than on the other variation, I mean, the idea of invading, hitting on e7, hitting these two spots, seemed like quite strong. So I think you can see why in the initial, Pausethevideoandthink position, I played rook bb1. However, this was a big mistake. And this is what is really instructive. You see that from a few moves ago, between what the moves I was making and what I was calculating, I was mainly focusing on the weakness of this king. However, I actually miss the defensive resources for my opponent, which are pretty cool. First, I want to show you that and the way that the game followed and ended before showing you the right solution. So one of the lines I had seen is if my opponent had rushed with the other rook, so as to be able to answer rook takes on f8 check with rook takes on f8, well, simply rook takes on b7. And I don't know if I was winning, but I was loving my position right here, logically. My opponent played rook takes on f1. I had seen this, and after rook takes on f1, rook on a6 he played, and this is lights out for me. Immediately lights out. This is absolutely winning for black. So it's really curious because I play bishop on f7 check, king on h8 only move, and you can see the problem with the rook on a6 is that it's threatening this pawn with check. So this pawn on h6 was like one of my main weapons to actually have, tactical themes against black's king. So that means that now both bishop on e8 and bishop on e6 are insufficient. I mean, the idea of bishop on e8 obviously loses because rook takes on e6 is check. Otherwise, I will be winning, again, threatening the bishop and the mate on f8. But that is why in the game I played bishop on e6. But once again, I'm just underestimating and actually missing the defensive resources. He just took it. Now, once again, this is not mate because the bishop prevents the mate, and at the same time, he saves himself. So I actually had to play the sad d takes on e6. Yes, once again, I'm threatening rook on f8 check, mate. Well, he just played king on g8, and I'm losing. I mean, I think in the game I played some rook on f5, takes, something like that, but it was obviously play king on f8, something like that, but it was obviously hopeless. So from the initial, this position where I ask you what to play, Pausethevideoandthink, you can see why this is the thing. I was like bamboozled by all the tactical themes that were surrounding black's king, my opponent's king, but they were actually not working. So the right move was to immediately forget about anything against black's king. This is what is so funny, and I found that this is quite instructive. You have to, in a way, take your gaze away from what is more attractive. So it's like you have these diamonds right in front of you. Well, you have to look, elsewhere. That's the thing. You have to play, instead of rook b1, what I played, rook fb1, going the other way, was actually the right move. And actually abandoning any possibility of like an immediate attack against black's king. So it's so funny. Okay, in this case, we'll switch our gaze to, you know, the weakness on the b7 pawn, and for example, well, bishop c8, we can already throw d6, pawn takes, rook takes. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if this is equal. Maybe white is already better even. But it's so funny, right? I mean, from this position, I mean, rook bb1 is such an attractive move, and certainly having all my units around black's king. But however, the right way was to forget about all of that, switch my attention to the other side. So, well, if anyone found rook fb1, really congratulations, because everything was pointing out the other way, you know. And yeah, of course, it had to do also with good calculation. I mean, rook on a6, and consider the fact that, yeah, in here nothing is enough. Not bishop on e8, not bishop on e6. You know, always the resource of king g8. You know, it's well, more than enough. And of course, the fact that he could take it with check. Well, that is why bishop on e8 wasn't possible. So, well, again, if you found the right move, really congratulations, because I totally failed to do so in the game. So thanks a lot for watching. I will ask you to like, comment, share, and subscribe as usual. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.